July 28th, 1996. The English Channel. Cold, dark waters. An ordinary fishing trawler hauls in its nets, expecting the usual catch. But instead of fish, something far more terrifying hits the deck. It was the body of a man. The ocean spares no one. After weeks in the salt water, the body was unrecognizable. No face, no fingerprints, no ID in the pockets of his rotting jacket. For the police, it was a classic dead end. The perfect crime where the water washed away every shred of evidence. It seemed as if this man had never existed. But the killer, planning the perfect crime, failed to calculate one tiny detail. You was a witness left on the victim's wrist. A silent, metallic witness, indifferent to corrosion, pressure, and time. It was a Rolex, Oyster Perpetual. When the coroner scraped away the layers of silt and algae, he froze. The watch hadn't just survived. It's ticking. A mechanical heart, still beating exactly where a biological heart had stopped so long ago. This mechanism had outlived its owner, and it was ready to tell his story. To the police, this piece of steel was just an expensive trinket. But for the investigators, it was the key. Rolex has kept obsessive records of its production since the early 20th century. Inside the case, a unique serial number was engraved. These numbers were a passport. Scotland Yard reached out to Geneva, and the answer came back instantly. The Swiss archives revealed the exact date of sale, the store, and, most importantly, the buyer's name. The watch belonged to a man named Ronald Platt.
And this is where the real thriller began. The police checked their database and found out that Ronald Platt was alive. He was living calmly in London, paying his bills, going to work. But it was a lie. The man in London turned out to be the international fraudster Albert Walker, one of Interpol's most wanted criminals. He had murdered the real Ronald, dumped his body in the sea, and stolen his identity. He thought the ocean was a safe place for secrets. He failed to calculate only one thing. His victim wore a watch that simply didn't know how to die. The killer was sentenced to life imprisonment, thanks to Swiss punctuality. But this story is not about crime. It is about engineering. Today, we are not going to talk about Rolex as a toy for millionaires or rappers. We will look at it as the black box of civilization. How did they manage to create a mechanism that defies entropy? Why does this steel not rust, where everything else rots? And is there really science behind this, or just marketing? Welcome to the story of how man tried to buy immortality. Let's go back to 1905. London, the era of steam engines and gentlemen. At that time, a self-respecting man would never wear a watch on his wrist. It was considered ridiculous. Wristwatches, or as they were called back then, wristlets, were exclusively female accessories, fragile, inaccurate, and unreliable. Real men wore watches in their vest pockets, on chains. It was believed that the active movement of a man's arm would simply break the mechanism. Watchmakers laughed. You want to put a complex mechanism on a wrist where you constantly wave, bang, and shake it? That is impossible. But there was one young German who thought differently. His name was Hans Wilsdorf. He was not a hereditary watchmaker from the Alps. He was an orphan who achieved everything himself. Working as a clerk in an export office, he realized one thing others did not see. The future is speed. The world was accelerating. Cars, phones, sports. A modern man has no time to stop, unbutton a coat, reach into a pocket, and take out a watch. Time must always be right before his eyes. Wilsdorf decided to do the impossible, create a wristwatch that a man would not be ashamed to wear. But first, he needed a name. At that time, brands were named after the founders' surnames: Patek Philippe, Vacheron Constantin. Calling the company Wilsdorf and Davis was too long and too German for England. He wanted a word that is pronounced the same in any language of the world. Short, resonant, that would fit on the dial. The legend says that one morning, riding on the top deck of a London omnibus, he heard someone or something whisper in his ear, "Rolex." This word meant nothing, but it sounded like the clicking of a lock, like the sound of reliability. Utvet Gemini, having a good name, was not enough. The world still considered wristwatches toys that lie 5 minutes a day. Wilsdorf needed proof, an ironclad argument. In 1914, he sends his small wristwatches to the Kew Observatory in Great Britain. It was the Olympus of precision. There, they tested marine chronometers, huge instruments, upon which sailors' lives and ship navigation depended. No one believed that a wristwatch would pass this test. But then, a miracle happened. After 45 days of hellish tests, in cold, heat, and different positions, Rolex received the Class A chronometer certificate. For the first time in history, a wristwatch became an officially recognized precision instrument. It shattered the mold. Wilsdorf proved that size does not matter. When the First World War began, soldiers in the trenches realized a second of delay is death. Pocket watches were left in the past. The world strapped watches to their wrists. But Rolex still had one most terrifying enemy: water. Wilsdorf solved the problem of precision, but a wall stood before him that no one could break: water. For a mechanical watch, water and dust are death. Just one microscopic drop of moisture inside the case is enough for the oil to thicken and the springs to cover in rust. In the 1920s, watches were leaky. Moisture entered through the glass, through the case back, and especially through the winding crown hole. Watchmakers said, to make a watch waterproof is like trying to keep a book dry at the bottom of the ocean. But Hans Wilsdorf did not listen to the experts. He looked at things simply. He recalled how a regular canning jar closes and how a hatch on a submarine is sealed, a screw connection. In 1926, he buys a patent for a sealing system and perfects it. He creates a case where the back cover and the winding crown are not just inserted, but tightly screwed into the body. He named it Oyster. Why an oyster? Because this mollusk can spend its entire life in the water. yet remain dry and protected inside until it decides to open itself. The invention was ready, but people laughed. A waterproof watch? Come on, that is an advertising lie. Wilsdorf needed a public crash test, and fate threw him a chance. A young secretary named Mercedes Gleitze announced she would swim the English Channel, the coldest and most dangerous strait between England and France. Wilsdorf gifts her a Rolex Oyster and asks for one favor: take the watch with her into the water. She agreed, but she didn't put it on her wrist. She hung it around her neck, like a talisman. The swim was hell. Mercedes spent over 10 hours in the icy water. She didn't quite reach the finish line. She was pulled from the water semi-conscious due to severe hypothermia. Journalists surrounded the boat. Everyone was thinking about the girl's health. But Hans Wilsdorf was thinking about one thing: is the watch alive? When the doctors were examining Mercedes, someone checked the Rolex. Inside the case, there wasn't a single drop of water. The second hand continued its run just as rhythmically as it had on dry land. It was a victory. Wilsdorf did not waste a single minute. The next day, he bought out the front page of the Daily Mail, the most expensive advertising space in England. He announced the birth of the Oyster watch. To finally crush the skeptics, he ordered all Rolex dealers to place aquariums with water and goldfish in their shop windows. Watches were submerged in them, ticking away for months. Passers-by stopped, unable to believe their eyes. It was a stroke of genius. Rolex ceased to be just a mechanism. It became a symbol of survival. The Oyster was a brilliant invention, but it had one Achilles heel: the human. A mechanical watch runs on a spring. It needs to be wound every day. To wind the Rolex Oyster, the owner had to unscrew the waterproof crown, turn it, and screw it back in. Every time you do this, you wear down the threads and the rubber gaskets. Over time, the seal vanishes. And if you forgot to screw the crown back in all the way, one shower, and the watch is dead. Wilsdorf realized, for a watch to be truly airtight, we must forbid people from touching it. But where was the energy to come from, if not from the owner's fingers? Batteries didn't exist yet. Engineers looked at humans themselves. We are walking power plants, constantly in motion. When we walk, our arms swing. When we pick up a phone, when we drive, we expend kinetic energy. What if a watch could steal this energy from us, drop by drop, and store it in the spring? The idea of self-winding already existed, but it was flawed. In Harwood watches, the weight would bang against the walls, breaking the mechanism. Rolex decided to make it perfect. In 1931, Rolex patents the perpetual rotor system. It is brilliantly simple. A semicircular weight, a rotor, was installed inside the mechanism. It rotates freely on its axis, 360 degrees. Gravity always pulls it toward the center of the Earth. When you lift your hand, the watch case turns, while the rotor, under its own weight, seeks to fall down. This rotation is transmitted to the spring through a system of gears. You just scratched the back of your head, and the watch received energy for 30 minutes of run time. You walked to the office and charged it for a day. It is like you are standing on a bus. The driver hits the brakes. Your body flies forward. The driver turns. You lean to the side. You do not want to move. Gravity and inertia do it for you. Engineers placed such a passenger inside the watch. But here, a danger arises. What if you are a tennis player? Or you run a marathon and swing your arms for 3 hours straight? The mechanism would spin so fast that it would overwind the spring, and it would simply snap from the tension. Engineers came up with a brilliant safety mechanism. It works like a fuel nozzle at a gas station. When the tank is full, the nozzle clicks and stops pouring gasoline. In a Rolex, when the spring is 100% wound, it simply begins to slip inside the barrel. You can swing your arms all day long. The watch will take exactly as much energy as it needs, and ignore the rest. That was when the inscription we still see today appeared on the dials. Oyster Perpetual, the eternal oyster. It changed the very philosophy of owning an object. An electronic watch runs on a battery. It is indifferent to you. But mechanics, it is a symbiont. As long as you wear it, as long as you are alive and moving, it is alive. Take it off, put it on the table, and in 2 days, it will die. It will stop. To revive it, you must take it in your hands again. This creates an emotional connection that gadgets simply don't have. The watch lives your life. Imagine that the mainspring of a watch is a bucket of water. It stores an immense amount of energy. If you simply release this spring, it will pour out all that energy instantly. It would unwind in a single second with a wild screech. This won't show you the time. It is just a tiny explosion. The task of Rolex engineers is to make sure this bucket does not tip over, but instead pours out the water one tiny drop at a time. You need to stretch this 1-second explosion over exactly 48 hours. For this, you need a brake. And that brake is called the escapement. How do you measure equal intervals of time? You need a pendulum. In a wristwatch, the pendulum is a wheel called the balance. Imagine a child on a swing. It flies forward, stops, flies back. It is a perfect rhythm. But there is a problem. Due to friction and air resistance, the swing will eventually stop. To keep it from stopping, you need a dad to give it a push. In a watch, the role of this dad is performed by a part resembling a ship's anchor, the pallet fork. It takes a little energy from the spring and gives the balance a gentle nudge. Push, push, and so on for 40 hours straight. This very battle between the dad and the swing is what you hear when you hold a watch to your ear. The famous tick-tock is not the sound of time. It is the sound of an impact. It is the sound of the pallet fork first locking the gear, tick, and then allowing it to rotate by one microscopic step and locking it again, tock. It is a mechanism that transforms the chaos of the spring into the order of seconds. It slices time into pieces, like a chef slicing a sausage, into perfectly even slices. But why is a Rolex more accurate than an ordinary watch? Imagine a child spinning top. If you spin it slowly, it wobbles and falls at the slightest touch. But if you spin it at a frantic speed, it becomes stable as a rock. You can nudge it, and it will still level itself out. It's physics. Speed provides stability. The heart of a Rolex beats at a frequency of 28,800 beats per hour. That is 8 beats every second. In the time it took you to blink, the Rolex managed to do 4 tick-tocks. It is this frantic speed that allows it to ignore shocks, hand tremors, and gravity. It is too fast to fall. That is why the Rolex second hand does not tick once a second, like in cheap quartz watches, but glides smoothly across the dial. In reality, it is an illusion. It also takes steps, but these steps are so small and frequent, 8 steps per second, that our eye cannot manage to notice them. To us, it looks like magic. But for an engineer, it is simply the victory of high frequency over our imperfect vision. 1943, the height of the Second World War. Thousands of British and American pilots are held in German prisoner of war camps. The Nazis confiscated everything from the pilots, maps, compasses, and of course, watches. Without time, escape is impossible. You do not know when the guards change, or how many minutes you have before the searchlight beam returns. But Hans Wilsdorf found out about this, and he made a move that went down in business history as the greatest risk. Wilsdorf announced, "If you are an officer in captivity, write us a letter. We will send you a Rolex directly to the camp. You will pay for it after the war, only if you survive. Your word as an officer is enough for me." It seemed like madness. Sending thousands of expensive watches into prisoner of war camps without any guarantees? But it worked. The Nazis often allowed Red Cross packages to pass through, and over 3,000 watches reached the prisoners. It was these very Rolexes that were used to coordinate the legendary Great Escape. They measured the precise seconds between life and death. 1953, Everest, minus 40 degrees. What happens to metal in such cold? Remember the experiments with liquid nitrogen? Ordinary steel becomes brittle, like glass. One hit, and a gear axle can simply snap. But even worse is the lubricant. Every watch has tiny drops of oil to make the parts glide. In the frost, ordinary oil turns into thick glue. The mechanism simply bogs down in it, like a fly in honey. Rolex had to invent a special synthetic lubricant that remains liquid even in the death zone. This was the chemistry that allowed mechanics to survive where even breath freezes. (1960). The ocean floor. Pressure, 1 ton per square centimeter. How do you protect a watch from being crushed? Nature provided the answer. Take a raw chicken egg and try to crush it in your fist by squeezing evenly from all sides. You can't. A sphere is the strongest shape in the universe. Pressure doesn't break it. It distributes evenly across the surface. That is why, for the deep dive, Rolex made the glass domed, like a massive lens or a cupola rather than flat. At a depth of 11 kilometers, the water tried to crush the glass, but it only pressed it harder into the case, sealing the watch tight. The physics of the sphere defeated the brute force of the ocean. That was when Rolex stopped being just a device that tells what time it is. It turned into a multi-tool, like a Swiss Army knife. An ordinary watch is just a knife. It cuts time. But a professional Rolex is a survival kit. Divers were given the Submariner with its rotating bezel. This wasn't for beauty. It was a vital timer that told the diver, "You have 15 minutes of air left. Surface now." Pilots were given the GMT Master. It shows the time in 2 countries simultaneously, so the aviator wouldn't get confused by time zones or lose track of their schedule during long-haul flights. Racers were given the Daytona, a mechanical computer on the wrist, to calculate lap speeds. These weren't ornaments, they were professional tools, without which a pro wouldn't even start their shift. It seemed Rolex was invincible. But on December 25th, 1969, the world changed forever. In Japan, Seiko introduced the world's first quartz watch, the Astron. Instead of complex springs and gears, it used a battery and a quartz crystal. It was a shock. A quartz watch was 10 times more accurate than the finest Rolex. It didn't need winding. It didn't fear shocks. And most importantly, the technology was getting cheaper by the day. If mechanics was a horse, alive, beautiful, but expensive, then quartz was a car, faster, more reliable, and accessible to everyone. What historians call the quartz crisis began. For the Swiss, it was an apocalypse. People threw away their outdated mechanics in droves and bought trendy electronic watches from Casio and Seiko. Why pay $1,000 for a watch that is less accurate than a $10 one? It made no sense. Within 10 years, 2/3 of Swiss watch companies went bankrupt. Thousands of craftsmen were left on the street. A great industry was dying. Rolex, too, stood on the edge of the abyss. And here, Rolex made a move that is studied in every business school in the world. Everyone around them was lowering prices, trying to survive. But Rolex raised them. CEO Andre Heiniger said the legendary phrase, "We don't sell watches, we sell luxury." They realized they couldn't compete with quartz in precision. So, they changed the playing field. Rolex stopped being a tool for measuring time. It became a symbol of success, like a Picasso painting. You don't need a painting to cover a hole on the wall. You buy it for the art and the status. Rolex turned the flaws of mechanics, its complexity, manual assembly, and old-fashioned nature, into its greatest strengths. To understand this logic, look at horses. When cars were invented, horses became obsolete as transport. They were slow. They required feeding and medical care. But did horses disappear? No. They became an elite pursuit. Today, owning a horse is expensive and prestigious. It signals that you have wealth and taste. Rolex did the exact same thing. A quartz watch is your Toyota, just to get you to the office. But a mechanical Rolex, that is your Arabian stallion on your wrist. You don't buy it to check the time. The time is on your phone. You buy it for the feeling of eternity and for belonging to an elite club. The strategy worked. While competitors were dying, Rolex became the most coveted brand on the planet. They proved that in a digital world where everything becomes obsolete in a year, your iPhone, your laptop, your smartwatch, people desperately want something analog, something real. That is how they survived. But to justify those sky-high prices, they had to do one more thing. They had to invent a metal that no one else had. The alchemy of steel. What is an expensive watch made of? Almost the entire luxury industry, from Omega to Patek Philippe, uses 316L steel. It is called surgical steel. Scalpels, implants, and high-end cookware are all made from it. It is a wonderful metal. It is hard, beautiful, and almost never rusts. Almost is the key word. Rolex engineers noticed an unpleasant detail. If a watch spends years in contact with salt water and human sweat, which is essentially acid, the case back begins to develop micro-corrosion. This is pitting. Tiny pits, invisible to the eye, but enough to destroy the ideal. In the 2000s, Rolex decided to do something no one had done before. They changed the recipe of their steel. They switched to 904L. Previously, this steel was only used in the aerospace industry and chemical plants, specifically for tanks storing sulfuric acid. Imagine you are cooking soup. 316L steel is just water and potatoes. 904L steel is when you add a bunch of expensive spices, far more nickel, chromium, molybdenum, and most importantly, copper. This cocktail makes the metal chemically inert. You could drop such a watch into a bucket of acid and nothing would happen to it. Why don't other brands use this super steel? Because it is a true production nightmare. 904L steel is so hard and ductile that it breaks ordinary tools. When Rolex switched to this metal, they had to throw away all their machinery. Old cutters and drills simply burned out or became blunt in a minute. They had to invest billions of dollars in new equipment and tools made of special alloys. This was a price no one else was willing to pay. That is why Rolex is the only mass-market brand in the world that works with this metal. Why go through all this trouble just to protect against acid? No. The main benefit of 904L steel is beauty. Thanks to its high nickel and chromium content, this steel polishes much better than the ordinary kind. If you place a Rolex and another expensive watch side by side, you will notice the difference. Ordinary steel has a grayish tint. Rolex steel glows with a cold, white light. It looks almost like white gold or platinum. This unique luster is one of the signs by which experts distinguish an original from afar. It shines expensive. But the case, it isn't everything. The most vulnerable spot on a watch is the bezel, that colored ring around the crystal. It is constantly bumping into door handles and getting scratched. In the past, they were made of aluminum, and after 5 years, they looked like junk. Rolex solved the problem radically. They started baking bezels out of ceramic. This isn't clay for making pots. This is a high-tech powder baked in a furnace at a temperature of 1500 degrees. The result is a material called cerachrom. It is so hard that it can only be scratched by a diamond. 50 years later, this bezel will look exactly the same as the day it was purchased. Not a single scratch, and not a single bit of fading in the sun. We live in the era of super clones. Chinese factories have learned to perfectly copy the appearance of a Rolex. From a distance of 1 meter, you won't be able to distinguish a $500 fake from a $15,000 original. Your eyes can deceive you, but your fingers and your ears, never. Rolex quality is not just a picture. It is the engineering of touch. There are 3 tests that will tell you the truth without a single microscope. You simply need to close your eyes and listen. Test number 1, the bezel. Take the watch and rotate the ring around the dial. In cheap watches and fakes, it feels like a grater. It turns either too easily or it sticks. The sound is tinny, cheap, and plasticky. An original Rolex sounds like a bank vault. Every click, and there are exactly 120 of them, is a crisp, satisfying mechanical strike. Engineers spend months tuning the spring under the bezel so that it produces that exact expensive sound. It is not just a switch, it is a tactile pleasure. Test number 2, the winding. Unscrew the crown and try to wind the watch manually. In fakes, you will immediately feel grit. It feels as if sand has been poured inside the mechanism. You can feel the gear teeth catching and scraping metal against metal. It's a crunch. At Rolex, they call this sensation a hot knife through butter. You feel the resistance of the mainspring, but the movement is absolutely smooth, viscous, and silent. The parts are polished so perfectly that friction almost disappears. This sensation is impossible to fake on a cheap machine. Test number 3, the monolith. Simply shake the watch in the air or tap your finger on the bracelet clasp. Most watches in the world rattle. There are micro gaps between the bracelet links, and they jingle like a bunch of keys or the door of an old taxi. A Rolex feels like a piece of granite. The gaps between the links are measured in microns. When you close the clasp, you don't hear a rattle, but a solid, muffled click. This is the same effect for which people love the doors of a G-Wagon. The sound of heavy, reliable metal. If the watch on your wrist sings and rattles, it's not a Rolex. Here is the secret. Faking the appearance is easy. Faking the physics is expensive. To keep the bracelet from rattling, you need machines with a precision of 0.001 millimeters. To make the bezel click like a vault, you need perfect steel. To make the mechanism run like butter, every single gear tooth must be hand-polished. Counterfeiters won't do this, because then the fake would cost as much as the original. So, next time, don't look, just feel. You think Rolex is a greedy shark of capitalism raking in billions? Hold on tight. The Rolex company has no owner. Hans Wilsdorf was an orphan. He had no children of his own. When his wife died, he transferred 100% of the company's shares to a charitable foundation. Since 1960, and to this day, Rolex has belonged to the Hans Wilsdorf Foundation. This means they have no shareholders. They don't have to report to investors or chase quarterly profits. Where do the billions of dollars in profit go? Part of it goes toward new equipment, and the rest to charities, schools, and orphanages in Switzerland. And they do it secretly. It is a condition of the will. Do good, but do it quietly. This unique structure created an economic paradox. Rolex is perhaps the only mass market item that is not an expense. Buy a new car, and as soon as you drive off the lot, you lose 20% of your money. Buy an expensive phone, and in 3 years, it will be junk. With a Rolex, it's different. You can wear it for 10 years, swim in it, and scratch it against rocks. And then, if you want, you can sell it for the same money you paid for it. Or even for more. It's not just an accessory. It's a bank account on your wrist. It's a way to freeze your money in a beautiful form. This stability has turned the watch into a global currency. They say that the Submariner is the ultimate traveler's passport. If you find yourself anywhere in the world, from a skyscraper in New York to the jungles of the Amazon, without a penny in your pocket, this piece of steel will save you. It is a liquid asset. It is recognized everywhere. It will be accepted everywhere. It is your emergency reserve, unafraid of inflation, defaults, or the collapse of the banking system. It is always with you, right on your wrist. And so, we have reached the end. What are we actually buying? We are all mortal. Our things break, our cars rust, our photographs fade. But this mechanism, it doesn't care about time. 50 years from now, when we are gone, your grandson will find this watch. He will give it a shake. The rotor will spin, the mainspring will tighten, and the heart will beat again. Tick, tock, tick, tock. We don't buy a Rolex to know what time it is. The time is on your phone. We buy it to pass time along. It is our attempt to touch eternity.